Ever notice how the things we can't have are exactly what we want most? That's not coincidence. It's human nature. Welcome to the calculated disappearance, where I'm about to reveal why becoming strategically unavailable might be the most powerful move you'll ever make. Think about it. When someone's always there, always available, always saying yes, their value drops. We take them for granted. But the moment they step back, suddenly we're wondering where they are, what they're doing, and why they're not responding to our texts. This isn't about playing mind games. It's about understanding a fundamental truth of human psychology that the most successful people have quietly used for centuries. Machiavelli knew it. Top negotiators know it. And after today, you'll know it too. What you're about to learn will transform how people perceive you. Friends who took you for granted will suddenly value your time. Colleagues who overlooked your contributions will start seeking your input. And romantic interests who seemed lukewarm, they'll begin to wonder what they're missing. But I need to warn you, there's a razor-thin line between strategic absence and simply disappearing. Use these techniques incorrectly, and you'll push people away permanently. Use them as I'll teach you, and you'll become the person others constantly think about, even when you're not around. Ready to discover why your absence might be more powerful than your presence? Let's dive in. Before I reveal these Machiavellian principles, understand this. Once you see how power truly operates, you cannot unsee it. This knowledge will fundamentally shift how you read people, situations, and the games being played around you every day. If you're not ready for that level of awareness, stop watching now. For everyone else, pay attention to every word. Number 1. The scarcity threshold principle. Have you ever noticed that certain people in your life seem to command more attention and respect than others? It's not always about their accomplishments or even their personality. Often it comes down to something much more subtle: their availability. You're about to discover why the most valued people are rarely the most available, and how you can apply this same principle to transform how others perceive you. Think about someone in your life right now who you deeply value, someone whose texts you answer immediately, whose calls you never miss, whose opinion matters greatly to you. Now ask yourself, are they always available to you? Chances are they're not, and that's no accident. What if I told you there's a precise mathematical sweet spot for how available you should be to maximize your perceived value? A formula that works across all types of relationships: romantic, professional, even friendships. This isn't about being manipulative or playing games. It's about understanding human psychology at its core. I call this the scarcity threshold principle, our first powerful strategy out of the 5 I'll share with you today. Your scarcity threshold is the exact point where your availability becomes scarce enough to increase your perceived value without crossing into neglect. Too available, your value drops. Too scarce, you're forgotten entirely. But right at that threshold, that's where your presence becomes precious. Here's how to calculate your own personal scarcity threshold. First, consider the type of relationship. Professional connections have a different threshold than romantic interests. For professional relationships, the golden ratio is responding to roughly 70% of communications promptly, while delaying or minimizing your availability for the remaining 30%. For romantic relationships in early stages, that ratio shifts to about 60-40. But here's where it gets interesting. You need to factor in your history with this person. If you've established a pattern of being constantly available, suddenly becoming scarce will seem suspicious. You need to gradually adjust your availability over time, decreasing it by no more than 15% per week until you reach your optimal threshold. Now let's talk about the other person's attachment style. For people with anxious attachment styles, you'll want to keep your threshold higher, perhaps 80% availability. For those with avoidant tendencies, a lower threshold around 50% often creates the most attraction and interest. The metrics for measuring this are simpler than you might think. Track your response patterns. How quickly do you reply to messages? How often do you initiate contact? How frequently do you accept invitations versus declining them? The goal is to maintain consistency within your chosen threshold, not to be erratic or unpredictable. What makes the scarcity threshold principle so powerful is that it works whether the other person is conscious of it or not. Our brains are hardwired to value what's slightly out of reach. When you precisely calibrate your availability, you trigger an unconscious response in others that makes them value your time and presence more deeply. I've seen this transform relationships overnight. One of my clients, a manager who was being taken for granted at work, implemented this principle, and within 2 weeks, her team began treating her input as gold. Another person used it in a relationship where he felt undervalued, and suddenly his partner began making more effort. Remember, this isn't about becoming cold or distant. It's about thoughtfully curating your presence so that when you are there, it matters more. The scarcity threshold principle isn't just theory. It's a practical tool you can implement today to dramatically increase how much others value you. Number 2, strategic vulnerability cycling. You've just learned about finding that perfect balance of availability through the scarcity threshold principle. But what if I told you that strategic absence is only half the equation? What happens during the moments when you actually are present makes all the difference. This brings us to our second powerful technique, strategic vulnerability cycling. Have you ever been around someone who rarely opens up, but when they do, it feels like the most meaningful conversation you've ever had? That's not coincidence. It's contrast. And you're about to learn how to create that same magnetic effect in your own relationships. Most people make one of two mistakes. They either share everything with everyone, diluting the impact of their vulnerability, or they remain closed off entirely, preventing deep connections from forming. What if there was a third option that combines the strengths of both approaches while eliminating the weaknesses? Strategic vulnerability cycling is technique number 2 of our 5-part system. It's about creating a rhythmic pattern of calculated absence paired with moments of heightened emotional presence. When done correctly, both states become more powerful because they exist in contrast to each other. Here's how it works. During your periods of limited availability that we established with the scarcity threshold, you maintain a pleasant but somewhat guarded demeanor. You're friendly, you're cordial, but you're not revealing your deeper thoughts or feelings. You're essentially operating at what I call level 1 vulnerability, showing your competence but not your heart. But then, during carefully selected moments of full presence, you shift to level 3 vulnerability, sharing authentic emotions, genuine challenges, or meaningful insights about yourself or your connection with the other person. This creates a dramatic contrast that makes these moments feel particularly significant. The key is timing these vulnerability spikes strategically. You want to create what psychologists call peak experiences, memorable emotional high points that stand out in the relationship. Research shows these peaks disproportionately influence how people remember and value their connection with you. For example, if you're in a professional setting, you might maintain a composed, capable presence most of the time. But during a team breakthrough or challenge, you might share a personal story about overcoming similar obstacles or express genuine appreciation for someone's contribution in a way that reveals your authentic values. In personal relationships, this might mean being comfortably independent much of the time, but then creating sacred moments of deep connection where you're fully present and emotionally available. What makes this so effective is the neurological impact. When we experience emotional contrast, our brains release more dopamine. the neurotransmitter associated with pleasure, reward, and wanting more. By cycling between these states, you're essentially creating a positive neurochemical response associated with your presence. Think of it like music. A song that stays at the same volume and intensity the entire time quickly becomes background noise. But a composition with dynamics, quiet verses, and powerful choruses commands attention and creates emotional impact. You're learning to compose the dynamics of your presence. The practical implementation is straightforward. Identify key moments for vulnerability, perhaps one meaningful interaction per week in important relationships. During these moments, practice active listening, maintain eye contact, put away distractions, and share something that matters to you or acknowledge something you value about them. When you cycle between strategic absence and moments of true vulnerability, you create a presence that feels both rare and meaningful. People begin to treasure their time with you because they know they'll experience something authentic that they don't get from others who are either always available or always guarded. Strategic vulnerability cycling isn't manipulation, it's curation. You're thoughtfully choosing when and how to share your emotional energy for maximum impact and connection. And when you master this second technique, you'll notice people begin to value their interactions with you in a whole new way. If you're still here, you already think differently. That alone sets you apart. Now, sharpen your edge. Hit subscribe. This is how you stay 10 steps ahead in a world that rewards the silent strategist. Number 3. The reverse echo chamber. We've covered how to calibrate your availability and create meaningful contrast through vulnerability. But what if your influence could continue to grow even when you're not physically present? That's where our third powerful technique comes in, one that leverages group psychology in a way few people understand. Have you ever noticed how certain people's ideas seem to gain more traction and attention than others, even when they're not around to advocate for themselves? It's as if their thoughts echo through the room long after they've left. This isn't random, it's the result of a deliberate strategy I call the reverse echo chamber. Most echo chambers amplify and reinforce the same ideas over and over. But a reverse echo chamber does something more powerful. It amplifies your value, your insights, and your contributions, specifically when you're absent. It's technique number 3 of the 5 strategies I'm sharing with you today. Here's how it works. Rather than trying to be the loudest or most constant voice in a group, you strategically plant ideas, make meaningful contributions, and then step back. This creates a vacuum that others naturally fill by referencing, building upon, and attributing value to what you've contributed. The first step is to make your contributions distinct and memorable. Before important meetings or social gatherings, ask yourself, what unique perspective can I bring that others won't? Then articulate that perspective clearly and concisely, ideally in a way that helps the group move forward. For example, instead of saying, I think we should use approach A, you might say, I've noticed that whenever we face challenges like this, approach A tends to address the root cause rather than just the symptoms. You're providing a framework others can apply even when you're not there. The second step is strategic attribution training. When present, make it a point to attribute good ideas to their originators. As Jessica mentioned earlier, or building on Mark's insight about. This establishes a culture of attribution that others will mirror. Once this pattern is established, your ideas will receive the same treatment when you're not present. The third step is planned absence. After making your contribution, deliberately reduce your participation or even physically leave if appropriate. This absence creates space for others to process and expand on your ideas. When they do this without you prompting them, your influence multiplies. What makes this approach so effective is that it leverages fundamental group dynamics. When others repeat your ideas, they become partially invested in them. They're not just amplifying your thoughts, they're incorporating them into their own thinking. This creates powerful allies who carry your influence forward. I've seen this transform people's professional reputation. One client used this approach in her executive team, making one insightful comment at the start of meetings, then listening more than speaking. Within months, people were referencing her perspective constantly, even in meetings she couldn't attend. The reverse echo chamber works because it turns others into advocates for your value. Rather than constantly having to prove your worth, you create conditions where others naturally recognize and reinforce it. This is particularly powerful for people who are more introverted or who find self-promotion uncomfortable. To implement this effectively, identify the 2 to 3 domains where you have genuine insight to contribute. Focus your contributions in these areas to develop a reputation as the go-to person for these topics. When people begin to say things like, "I wonder what Sarah would think about this," or "This reminds me of what John was saying last week," you'll know your reverse echo chamber is working. Remember, this isn't about manipulation. It's about strategic contribution and thoughtful absence. You're creating space for your value to be recognized organically, rather than having to constantly assert it yourself. And when mastered, this technique ensures that your influence continues to grow even when you're not in the room. Number 4, value vacuum architecture. So far, we've explored how to calibrate your availability, create meaningful emotional contrast, and ensure your ideas continue to resonate even in your absence. Now, we're going to dive into perhaps the most powerful yet misunderstood aspect of strategic absence, creating what I call value vacuum architecture. Have you ever heard someone say, "You don't know what you've got until it's gone"? That's not just a saying. It's a psychological principle that you can ethically apply to increase recognition of your true worth. This is technique number 4 of our 5-part system. Value vacuum architecture is about strategically creating spaces where your specific talents and contributions are temporarily unavailable, allowing others to fully recognize what you bring to the table. Think of it as deliberately stepping back so that the shape and size of your contribution becomes visible in your absence. Most people make the mistake of constantly proving their value through continuous effort and presence. But here's the counterintuitive truth. Sometimes the most powerful way to demonstrate your worth is by temporarily withdrawing the value you provide. Let me be clear. This isn't about playing games or manipulating others. It's about creating clarity around your contributions that often go unnoticed, precisely because you provide them so consistently. Here's how to implement value vacuum architecture effectively. First, identify your unique value propositions, the specific things you contribute that others don't. These might be tangible skills like strategic thinking or creative problem solving, or intangible qualities like bringing calm to tense situations or asking the questions no one else will ask. Next, look for opportunities to temporarily create a vacuum where these contributions would normally be present. For example, if you're always the person who organizes the team's projects, you might say, "I have a major deadline coming up, so I'll need someone else to coordinate our workflow for the next 2 weeks." Then comes the crucial part. When you return, don't immediately fill the vacuum yourself. Instead, allow others to acknowledge what was missing. You might ask, "How did things go with the coordination while I was focused elsewhere?" This gives them space to recognize and articulate the value you typically provide. The psychology behind this is fascinating. We humans are wired to notice change more than consistency. When something valuable is consistently present, we begin to take it for granted. It becomes an expected baseline rather than a recognized contribution. But when that value is temporarily removed, our awareness of it suddenly sharpens. I've seen this transform relationships where hard work was being overlooked. One client who consistently took on the role of mediator in his family felt unappreciated. When he temporarily stepped back from that role during a family gathering, tensions quickly rose until others began saying, We really need your help with this. You always know how to help us understand each other. Value vacuum architecture works in professional settings too. A manager who always made herself available for troubleshooting began blocking off deep work time twice a week. Soon her team started saying things like, "Let's hold that question for when Sarah's available. Her insight on these issues is really valuable." The key to implementing this ethically is transparency about your temporary withdrawal. Never create vacuums in emergency situations or when others are depending on you for committed deliverables. Instead, choose appropriate moments and be clear about your temporary step back. Also, this technique should be used sparingly, perhaps once every few months in any given relationship or setting. Used too frequently, it becomes a pattern of unreliability rather than a clarifying absence. When done correctly, value vacuum architecture doesn't damage relationships. It strengthens them by creating mutual recognition of what you genuinely contribute. It transforms implicit appreciation into explicit acknowledgement, often leading to more balanced relationships where your contributions are actively valued rather than passively expected. Remember, the goal isn't to make others struggle in your absence. The goal is to create clarity about your unique value so that your contributions can be properly recognized and appreciated when you are present. This fourth technique is about revealing your true worth by temporarily creating space for others to notice it. Number 5. Presence contrast mapping. We've covered 4 powerful techniques so far, from calibrating your availability to creating value vacuums. But there's one final strategy that ties everything together, a system I call presence contrast mapping. This 5th technique is what separates true masters of strategic absence from mere practitioners. Have you ever noticed how a single moment of brilliant presence can outweigh hours of ordinary interaction? Or how one meaningful conversation can reset an entire relationship? These aren't random occurrences. They're examples of extreme contrast, and you're about to learn how to create them deliberately. Presence. Contrast mapping is our 5th and final technique, a systematic approach to calibrating exactly how, when, and where to be intensely present to maximize the impact of your strategic absences. Think of it as choreographing the dance between your presence and absence for maximum effect. Most people distribute their presence evenly, giving similar quality attention across all interactions. But what if you could strategically concentrate your presence like a focused beam of light, making certain moments so vibrant and connected that they cast your necessary absences in a completely different light? Here's how presence contrast mapping works. First, you identify your high-impact presence moments, the specific times, places, and contexts where your full presence will create the most value. These might be key meetings, important relationship milestones, or situations where your particular strengths are especially needed. Next, you deliberately amp up your presence during these selected moments. This means eliminating distractions, bringing your full emotional and intellectual engagement, and being extraordinarily attentive and responsive. You're essentially turning up the brightness of your presence to its maximum level. For example, if you've identified weekly team meetings as high-impact moments, you might implement a strict no-phone policy for yourself. Come exceptionally prepared, actively engage with others' ideas, and make sure your contributions are particularly thoughtful and valuable. The third step is mapping these high-intensity presence moments against your necessary absences. The goal is to create what psychologists call a peak end effect, where people's overall impression of your relationship is disproportionately influenced by the peaks of their experience with you and how interactions end. This means scheduling your most impactful presence shortly before periods where you know you'll be less available. If you have a project requiring focused alone time, arrange an extraordinarily present one-on-one conversation with key team members the day before you step back. Their last impression before your absence will be one of exceptional connection. What makes presence contrast mapping so powerful is that it works with our natural cognitive biases. Our brains don't evaluate experiences evenly. We disproportionately remember and value moments of peak intensity and how interactions conclude. By mapping your presence to leverage these psychological principles, you ensure that your absences are always contextualized by powerful moments of connection. I've seen this transform how people are perceived. One client, an executive who traveled frequently, implemented presence contrast mapping by having extraordinarily focused one-on-ones before trips and meaningful team debriefs upon return. Despite being physically absent more than his colleagues, his team consistently rated him as more present and engaged than leaders who were in the office daily but distributed their attention evenly. To implement this in your own life, start by auditing your current patterns of presence. Where are you spreading yourself thin? Which interactions would benefit most from your heightened presence? Create a literal map of your week and highlight the 20% of interactions that deserve your most elevated presence. Then, deliberately practice contrast. During your identified high-impact moments, put away your phone, maintain eye contact, listen actively, and bring your full creative energy. Make these moments visibly different from your baseline interactions. Finally, communicate transparently about your accessibility patterns. Before periods of limited availability, you might say, "I'm going to be focused on this project for the next 3 days, but I'm completely present now and want to make sure we're aligned before I dive in." This frames your upcoming absence in the context of your current full presence. When you master presence contrast mapping, people begin to experience your patterns of engagement differently. Rather than seeing inconsistent availability, they perceive a thoughtful rhythm of intense connection and respected boundaries. Your absences become part of a valued pattern rather than frustrating gaps. This final technique completes our system by ensuring that both your presence and absence work together harmoniously, each enhancing the impact of the other. By mapping when and how to be extraordinarily present, you create the perfect complement to your strategic absences. We've covered a lot of ground in our journey through the art of strategic absence. From finding your personal scarcity threshold to mastering presence contrast mapping, you now have 5 powerful techniques that can transform how others perceive, value, and respond to you. Remember, this isn't about manipulation. It's about understanding human psychology and applying it ethically to create more balanced, appreciative relationships. It's about ensuring your true value is recognized rather than taken for granted. The most powerful aspect of these techniques is how they work together. Your calculated scarcity threshold creates the foundation, strategic vulnerability. Cycling builds emotional depth. The reverse echo chamber extends your influence. Value vacuum architecture reveals your unique contributions. And presence contrast mapping ties everything together into a cohesive approach. As you implement these strategies, you'll notice a profound shift. People will begin to value your time more highly, appreciate your contributions more deeply, and engage with you more meaningfully. You'll discover that sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer is your absence, followed by a return that reminds everyone exactly why your presence matters. Start small, be patient, and watch as the dynamics of your relationships transform. Your calculated disappearance might just be the most impactful move you ever make. The next video the algorithm chose for you isn't random. It's your next tactical upgrade. Click it now and continue your silent ascent. Those who hesitate lose influence.